Fourth-step introduction today. I was not the original person who was supposed to be doing this, so I'm going to try my best. Just a little bit of a backstory of the experience that I am going to give y'all. When I was about 1.5 years sober, I picked up a sponsor. That sponsor's name was David C. And David and I embarked on a very interesting journey where we wrote a fourth step preceded by a 15-month fifth step, to where we would go over one resentment for an hour, come back the next week, go back over the way we were feeling about it currently, touch on anything we might have missed, and then hit the next resentment the week following that. It was broken down from the big book, and he picked it up when he was actually out in Denver for this, let's just call it a very therapeutic and a very kind of counseling session of a fifth step. The idea behind it is that we wrote down our fourth step, and we made a personal inventory of every single thing that was bothering us, not since we first got sober. I'm pretty sure on my first resentment, or my first fourth step, I had like 83 people on it. This one contained about 15, with the intention behind it that we are going to cover anything that is still lingering, anything that is still bothering me, anyone that I could potentially am really acting out on to this day. So we're going to go down each column. There were 5 columns, and then afterwards, those 5 columns, what we did were a set of ideals for certain situations. The intention is to not only talk about what these columns were, why they were important, and some examples of it. So it's on my phone, so I apologize. I'm not watching the Masters right now. I am actually doing this. Obviously, the point of the fourth step is to do a personal inventory of all of our resentments, of our sex ideals, and of our fears. You present that fourth step to another man or woman in a fifth step and try to find the root causes of what's actually going on. Why are we having these resentments? So when we would write these down, I was given 2 weeks to do this. It took me 6 weeks because I just didn't want to do it. Column 1 was very simple. It was, who are we resentful at? Now, it was described to me, these are people that are keeping me up at night. On my original fourth step, I wrote down anyone like that guy, my buddy's dad named Mike. He used to flick me in the ear because he played football at Army and he thought it was funny to cause physical punishment on people. Yes, that did go down on my original fourth step. However, for the one that I was doing in this situation, the first person that started off was obviously, he told me, hey, your mom and your dad are going to go first. No matter what, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So any person that I had a resentment towards went in column 1. Followed that in column 2 was pretty simple. It was, what is the resentment? Now, I think it's very easy to write down what is the most blatant, resentment that I have. What is the resentment towards my mom? She was mean to me. She locked me in a closet. Any one of those type of things would be very simple to find down. But what I had to do when I was writing each one of the things in column 2, each one of the resentments, is find out truly, when I close my eyes, what is holding me back. What am I truly holding on to? And what is it getting to the point where, hey, this is popping up back up in every situation? For example, I will, for a lot of these instances for myself, I'm going to use the resentment that I had towards my brother for a long time. He was my half brother. We weren't that close. The resentment truly was at its simplest form that I did not have the brother that I thought I should have. And that's what kept me up at night. Long story short, my brother was the first person that got me high. Great dude. So now we're going into column 3. Now column 3 is broken down into 5 sections. Section number 1 is, how did this affect my? So pretty much what we're trying to find out in column 3 is, how did it affect me personally? We're not going to get into, necessarily where was I wrong in any of these things, but I just want to know how it affects me personally. And it can affect us in 5 different areas. It can affect us in our self-esteem, and our security, that being financial or personal, our personal relationship, our ambitions, and how did it affect our pride? So I actually want to go through all of these together, because when I was informed how to do a 4-step, every resentment touches every single one of those areas. Now, one might be heightened over the other one. For example, if I was mugged, security is probably going to be the one that was on there. But each one of my resentments was affected in each one of these 5 areas. So we can utilize the resentment that I had towards my brother. I was talking about this earlier. I wish I still had that 4-step. I sold my old car recently, and I'm pretty sure it was in the back seat. So somebody's gonna have a lot of fun reading that. There's two things that I want to, before I go into how it affected with the example with my brother, there's two ones I really want to emphasize. Number one is pride. The way this was affected and the way this was explained to me is pride is different from self-esteem, because self-esteem is the way it makes me feel about myself, and pride is what I don't want the rest of the world to see. And there's a huge difference, because I didn't really understand that the first time I wrote this down. I kind of wrote the same thing for both, but there's a difference between, hey, this is how I'm internalizing this feeling towards myself, and pride is, I don't want you to see this. And the reason that there is the specifics part for ambitions is that typically ambitions can be positive and ambitions can be negative. In some resentments that I did have, there were situations where the ambition was mean, it was vile, and it was cruel. However, a lot of times, truth be told, the ambition that I had written down was a net positive. Like, this is what I actually want from this situation. So in the example, when I wrote down for how it affected my brother, pride was pretty obvious. Is I didn't want the rest of the world to know that my brother potentially didn't care about me the way other brothers cared about them. And that was simple. Personal relationships, this resentment had gotten to a point where I no longer wanted to have a relationship with him. And truth be told, y'all, 10 years later, we still do not have the greatest relationship. However, we have come to a greater understanding of what that relationship is through this program. I'm sorry, that was ambitions. My apologies. I wanted to have a better relation, or I didn't want to have a relationship with him. Personal relations was pretty easy. I did not have a relationship with him because of this. Because of the resentment that we had in our past trauma together, we had zero relationship. Security, this was not obviously a financial insecurity. This was a personal security where when I was around him, he made me uncomfortable. When I was around him, I thought he was going to cause harm because he was going to bring up trauma. And last but not least was self-esteem, which is probably the most important one, which is me not having the brother that I thought I was supposed to have simply made me feel like I was less than other people. I would sit there and I would talk to people about their relationships with their family, especially while sober, and how they did such a great job of regaining that relationship back with people. And I did all of this work, I made these amends, and here we are being loving and kind to one another again, and I still didn't have that. And it made me feel like I wasn't doing a good enough job. The reason that it's important, especially from what I went through, to write down how did this affect me in all these areas was not just to put a blanket statement over and say, all right, cool, this is why I'm acting this way. It was more to get down to the root causes of why. I was insecure. I didn't want other people to know about it. When I was around him and when I talked about it, it made me uncomfortable. I didn't want a relationship with him at all, and that really broke me inside. And more importantly, for the past, at that time when I wrote that original 4-step, or the second 4-step, I was maybe 22 years old, and for 22 years, we had a shit relationship. And what that meant, pardon the language, this is being recorded, oopsie. The idea behind this, though, is that by breaking down all of these things one by one, we were having a deeper understanding of what's truly going on in the situation. When I went through the 4th step with my sponsor, we sat there and we talked about it. Not just over, okay, cool, you were insecure here. All right, cool, your pride was affected. This was why your pride was affected. The goal was to find out why are we bringing these things to the table, because only until that point are we actually to have growth. The next thing that we will write down is column 4. Now, column 4 is we get to be a little selfish and write down where was I. And it was where was I, and it was broken down into 4 sections. Where was I selfish, dishonest, afraid, and at fault. And this is now getting down to the meat and potatoes behind everything, which is what is my part to do in this. You see, in column 3, we're breaking down the resentment in a whole and looking at the greater picture of how it affects both of us. But now I need to find my part and figure out what I did wrong in all these situations. So for selfish, it was pretty simple, is I wanted my brother to be the one to step up and be the guy to take care of these things for me. I didn't want to take any action. I wanted him to do it and not me. I wanted him to be the bigger man, and I wanted him to carry me across the finish line, but that was completely unrealistic. Where was I dishonest in these things? And a lot of times the dishonesty kind of had a common thread behind it, which is that I loved telling people that this didn't bother me. I would love telling my parents that everything was okay. I would love telling friends that, you know what, my brother and I are just not cool with each other, it's no big deal, when it wrecked me on the inside. More importantly, when there was the off chance that my brother and I did have the obvious opportunity to talk, I avoided the conversation because that was significantly easier. After that was afraid, and I was afraid of one, being able to handle the truth, and two, I was afraid of being able to approach him with the topic. And that's where a lot of these things, when it comes down to the 4-step, is where were my fears in this, is that I didn't want to deal with it. And last but not at fault, this was kind of the summary at the end of it for where was I, which was simple. Where was I at fault? I was the reason that a lot of these resentments popped up. I was not the best brother in the world, and I blamed him for all of these situations, and I took it out on him. So now we have a basic understanding of not only what the resentment is, who it's at, what was the overall, every single basic principle of the resentment, but now we have my part in it. Now, in original 4-step instructions, we kind of stop there and we move on to fears. However, my sponsor had me do one more thing, which is column 5, how does this resentment serve me? AKA, what is this resentment doing in my day-to-day life to make me feel a certain type of way? What is this resentment bringing to the table and allowing me to act a certain way? Because simply, a lot of times, for example, with this resentment towards my brother, this resentment towards my brother allowed me to have some level of power. It allowed me to carry around that ego that inevitably needed to be smashed. I carried around this resentment for so long simply because it made me feel good. With all of these columns into play and with all of these ideals practiced, we now have a basic understanding of, all right, cool, this is what's going on with me. This is where I'm affected, this is how I'm acting out, and this is why I've been carrying around this for so long. At the end of it, hopefully what you've done with your sponsor during this time is you are writing down the character defects that's going into this resentment so you can practice them in 6 and 7, but we're going to get onto that at a later time. After the initial doing all of the resentments and you go over that with a sponsor in your 5th step, the next section is obviously fear. Now, fear and sex in the big book are kind of glossed over a little bit. It talks a lot about, it even breaks down the columns in the big book and gives you a rough idea, except it says, Mr. Brown, and then it just says insecure and pride, and then it goes on to the next section. We kind of just gloss over fear and sex because they're just not talked about as much, and especially when you're first getting sober, I don't think that a lot of us had the mental ability to go over those things. This was the way that fear was described to me by my sponsor and how to conquer fears. At first was column 1, which is we wrote down the fear. So basic fear that I had when I first got sober was very simple, which is this: I am afraid of not being good enough. It was one of the blanket fears throughout all of my fears. It was one of the blanket things that went through the course of my existence, which is I am not good enough. Now, the way it was initially broken down to me was that we only really have about 7 or 8 true fears. I think my sponsor gave me a list of 60 fears, and he said, please don't put spiders on there. I get it, it's cool. Just kill it, ignore it, get it outside. A lot of my fears were simple as, I was afraid of authority. I was afraid of not being good enough. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of the unknown, this, that, and the other. However, let's just use the example of I was afraid I was not good enough. After, with that being column 1, in column 2, what I was designed to do is write down, if this is my fear, then what would God have me be in this moment? And this got out of hand in a cool way. I could write down anything that I believe that God would have me be in that moment when this fear is popping up. So the fear of God with not being good enough, and everybody looked differently. It was trusting. It was the ability to trust in God. It was the ability when I was afraid that I was not good enough to call others and put service into place work. What I believed God would have me be is trustworthy of his plan. It would be honest about what's truly going on with me in this moment. It's humble enough to know that I'm not that big of a deal. Column 2 could be anything that I was personally going through and what I truly believed that I needed to do with my higher power. And then we would move on to column 3. And column 3 was the fun part, is you're taking column 2 and you are making a prayer. And I think that's a lot of what we don't talk about when it comes to the fear part of the 4-step, is that we are always taught that the opposite of fear is faith. It's that, I really hate those little catchphrases like that. But the opposite of fear is faith. So if I have this fear and I have to put faith into this situation, then obviously the action behind that is making a prayer. And so when these fears would pop up, and I would keep them on note cards, is I would actually say the prayer, Dear God, I am afraid that I am not good enough in this moment. Please help me be humble enough to know that I am not that big of a deal. Please let me have the ability to take some action and call somebody else and make sure that they realize they are being heard. God, allow me to realize that everything right now is going to be okay and this too shall pass. And so on and so on and so on. When it comes to fear, yes, it is very important to recognize what I am afraid of. And yes, it is important to bring those fears to God. However, it is also very important to bring those fears to God with a plan. This is how this is the action that I take on these things, and I can continuously change those over time. It doesn't have to be the same set in stone prayer. It doesn't have to have the same set in stone ideals. I will grow as a person, but my my plan will change as well. After that, we went on to sex. And this was always that really weird topic, especially in the big book. It's not talked about a lot. I think it talks about in some outside literature that this might be the thing that we struggle with the most. When it came down to sex, the best way to put it was in column, there was again more we love columns, don't we? Columns are fun. And column 1, we write down the person that we have caused harm to. Now, this is where when it comes to sex, the difference that it comes down to resentment is I am allowed to put myself on here. I was instructed that when I was doing resentment, I was not personally allowed to put myself down as a resentment because I would be pitying myself. It was up for me to put down other people that I've actually been resentful towards or caused harm to as the people on my 4-step. However, when it comes to sex, I am allowed to put myself down here. Because a lot of times I put myself inevitably in a position to be hurt when it comes to sex. So column 1, simply put, who did I hurt? Column 2, what was the action? Column 3, what should I have done differently? And I absolutely hated this part. Y'all, there's a lot of situations where in column 4, that I simply just should have never engaged in the action itself. I made a counter to myself that if I wrote down I should never have engaged in this action myself, I had to put a follow-up there. So for example, I never should have engaged in this action myself, ergo, I shouldn't have been dishonest to this person. I never should have engaged in this action myself, ergo, I should have been upfront with my ideals from the beginning. I never should have put myself in this situation, but also at the same time, I had a moment to cut it off and I did not do that. The reason that I find it's important to have just not the I shouldn't have been in this situation because it's a little bit of a cop-out. We're trying to figure out what I actually did in resentment. So for example, when I first got sober, I entered into a relationship that my sponsor advised me not to get in. I was about a year sober. When I got into that relationship, I very much quickly realized that I was not thinking correctly and my actions were, or my motives were not correct. It talks in the big book, check your motives at the door. My motives were not correct and I caused harm. Yes, it would have been very obvious to say I shouldn't have gotten into the situation in the first place. However, there was a moment of recognition where she asked me a question of, is this truly what you want? And I said, yes. And I lied. And that's the first step of the harm. So after all these columns where we write down, where was the harm caused, what was the harm caused, and what should I have done differently? The next column was simple, which is where was God in this? Unfortunately, a lot of the times the answer was there was not. And that was really humbling to write down in the moment. Because God was not brought into the situation with a lot of these resentments. God was not brought into the situation for a lot of these sex conducts. And God was never brought in for the fear until I actually consciously brought God into the fear. And the final column for sex was pretty simple. If God was brought in, how would this relationship looked? To be quite frank, at least specifically for mine, a lot of them would have been, there was no relationship. Especially at the end of my using, when I was not conducting myself correctly in any situation, the situation never would have happened in the first place if I would have brought God in from the beginning. I would have saved myself a lot of harm, and I would have saved myself a lot of amends. Because that was always a fun amends to make, was going over your sex ideals with someone. I want to reiterate one thing because I kind of just glossed over that last part of it real quick. When I first wrote this, I really thought I had to have profound answers for the sex part of my ideal. To be honest, my sex ideal was not anything crazy. The sex ideal was mainly me recognizing that because I never brought God into situations, I acted on my own self-will, and I ran into relationships, and I ran especially into women to fix me, and to fix the problem, and to fix the situation. And that couldn't be the case anymore. Now I'm going to start going on. This is not 100% instructed by the big book, but what my sponsor had me do in the 4th step was I wrote down a list of ideals. I was instructed to write down what was my ideal relationship with my higher power, what was my ideal relationship with my work, what was my ideal relationship with a significant other, what was my ideal relationship with myself, and I'm missing one. God, what was my ideal relationship with God, myself, my family, a woman, and work? And these rooms, sorry. The idea behind this is that I was trying to figure out exactly that if I brought God into all these situations, what would my life look like? What would I want it to be? And what I'm going to try to do with these situations by putting it down with pen and paper is to live my life as close to those ideals as I possibly can. And they change, y'all. I remember a long time ago, my grand sponsor used to say that he wrote his ideals for a woman down and put the ideals between his bed. And if a woman didn't match those ideals, she didn't get into bed with him. Wild concept. But the idea was behind all of this, and the reason that I went over this with my sponsor was simple, is that now that I've done all this work on myself and I have gone over where I am wrong, I have the opportunity to be set free after making some amends, right? And after making some amends and being set free and continuously doing this work, I would like to be able to paint a picture for myself and try to live my life close to as what I would like my life to be with God in it. So at first I started with the obvious one, which is what is my ideal relationship with God? And I wrote down some crazy and euphoric things, like I'd like God to be there at the drop of a hat. I'd like to be able to have the ability to pray at any given moment. Not necessarily the case. At the end of it, my ideals became more simplified, and I just wanted a God that would listen, and I wanted a God that was true to me. What was my ideal relationship with a woman? I had to write down, based upon what I had learned so far from myself in this 4th step, what kind of relationship would I truly want? What kind of relationship would I truly value? By doing that, when I would have eventually, inevitably, because women are like drugs, and for men, men are like drugs. There you go. Eventually, I would find myself addicted to something else, right? And unfortunately, the addiction would take place in the shape of a relationship. By writing down what my ideal relationship was for a woman, because if you're anything like me, if I can't go get drug A, I'm going to go get drug B. And if I can't find my ideals, I'm going to find it in somebody else. I'm going to force that ideal upon somebody else. The cool thing about a relationship with a woman, or an ideal relationship with my family, an ideal relationship with my work, is that it forever changed. And every year I would sit down and write a new one with my sponsor because I have grown as a person from doing this work. And then last but not least, I did my ideal relationship with these rooms, and this one was pretty simple, is I wanted at the end of the day to be in a situation and be with a group of people that loved me for me, that accepted me for me, and when I showed up, someone actually called me by my first name. But that required work by me. So to summarize, I have no idea how I'm going to talk till 3:15. This is going to be so much fun. To summarize, we went over 3 different sections with this. 4 different sections. We went over the actual 4th step inventory. The 4th step inventory, going over resentments, was listed down into certain columns. Columns and tensions, especially in column 3, which is how did this affect my self-esteem, my security, my personal relations, my ambitions, and my pride, is to figure out the actual true root of what is going on in the situation. Using the example that we used earlier, the true root of the situation when it came to someone like my relationship with my brother was that there was not a relationship. I didn't want to initiate the relationship, and I wasn't going to put in the energy to fix all of the harm that was caused to me. And in column 4, we're trying to find the truth of what I did to myself, how I acted in this, and the things that I did wrong. Following, we go on to our to our fear, where we are intentionally looking at what is the true root of the fears that I am facing on a day-to-day basis, what God would have me be in the moment, and a prayer that I can give to God that requires some level of action. In our sex, we're trying to figure out what we should have done differently and how that relationship would have looked differently, so the next time that situation pops up, I already have the tape and I know what's going to happen. And I have an idea that I can actually make amends off of. And then last but not least, we are writing down ideals that we would want for our lives. More importantly, what we are writing down simply is how, with God's help, would our life look in every given situation so that we can most closely monitor what we are doing and bring that to our higher power. Before I continue rambling on for Lord knows how long time, does anybody have any questions? Because I have gone on a Shakespearean monologue. What's up? Absolutely. Yeah, I'll bring the mic to the next person. Whoever would want it. Yes. Sure.
Shit. I'm not. I'm a drug addict. I've just heard different perspectives. I'd like your perspective. When I give a guy a 4-step, I lay it all out and then send him out for 2 weeks. But I've heard people giving it in chunks and pieces, and giving them the first 2 columns or giving them all the resentments and then making them do fear after they've met. I just want to know your perspective on that.
I think there, at least from my perspective, there's a differentiator between where they currently are in their recovery and what you're willing to give in that moment. For example, when I did my first 4-step, that was a 9-hour session that I sat down at a coffee shop with another individual. When I went through something like this, it was broken down more piece by piece with the intention that this is going to be a while. From the original Oxford group back in the day, they would sit down and do this 1 through 5 straight, or 1 through numbers 7 straight through. And they would sit there in the Oxford group and sit and do everything all the way up until going to make amends, and they would let them go. So especially for the first time, it was important for me to recognize that I was going to sit here and I was going to sit down with another man and do this. As I picked up more time, as my resentments became a little bit more complicated, my resentments were attached to my sobriety, then I would take things more piecemeal, but that was mainly my perspective behind it.
So you're talking about shaping the ideals, and when you were talking about that, like I was told to use my primary purpose in a relationship. What's your primary purpose? What's the other person in the relationship's primary purpose, or your of what it is? And did you use that to shape your sane ideal in each one of those?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important part because in my relationship specifically, one, I wanted to be useful, and there were things that I wanted to bring to the relationship. I do think it's also important, though, to look at on the other side of that. Because when you're entering a relationship with somebody else, not only are you bringing along the things that you have done in your past into the relationship, and this is how you want to present yourself to that person, but at the same time, I do have needs that I need to be making or taken care of, and I would like the person that I am with to meet me on that level. Is it perfect? No. Absolutely not, and nor do I believe in any situation that I'm going to find down exactly my ideals. However, what am I bringing this relationship? What is my purpose? What is my usefulness to this other person? How am I conducting myself day in and day out, or at least intending to conduct myself? And then on the opposite side of that, what is being brought to me? What are the things that I need from looking over all of my past inventories? And if I get what I want, and I get what I'm looking for, does that fulfill what I'm looking for? Does that answer your question?
Is that the same on work, family?
Absolutely. Because there's a great situation where they're like, when we talk about our ideals when it comes to like work and family and everything like that, playing these things. I would love more than anything for my ideals when it comes to my work, which is I get paid lots of money to do absolutely nothing. That'd be completely wonderful. However, like, what am I looking for in a job? What would give me a level of fulfillment? And at the same time, how do I want to conduct myself on a regular basis? A little bit of a backstory. I manage people for my job. And so the expectations that I have at my job is, all right, cool. How do I want to conduct myself on an every single day basis? What kind of man do I want to be with God's help? And more importantly, what is the type of language that I would like to use? What is the type of person that I want them to see? And when I sit into confrontation, what does that look like? I think all of those things are important to examine, which is why I think I wrote like 6 or 7 pages for each one, because it wasn't necessarily just I get paid lots of money, people love me, and I get to read books when I work from home, which is actually what I do some days. But it's more importantly like, hey, this is what my team thinks about me. This is the type of boss that I would like to have. And then how can I bring this to the next person? And how can I be the best version of myself? And how can I act in God's will in all these situations? Because especially when it comes to something like work, I am acting in God's will does not mean it is going to be easy, because work life is what it is.
My name's Holden, and I'm a drug addict. with the purpose, something I didn't get to do in my 4-step, like purpose on work, relationship, etc. You said you did it once every year. Did you do it when you redid a 4-step, or did you just go back to it when you were doing it? And with that, how much of a difference have you seen the change with purpose every year?
So I rewrote the ideals every year without doing a 4-step every year. The ideals changed a lot. I think the big important thing when it comes to ideals when doing any type of inventory like that is, one, we significantly grow as people. And also, when it was talked about earlier, like, just because we are sober does not mean we are perfect people. Ergo, I will go through a relationship that does not work. And what I've learned about myself, I will want to, and the work that I've done on myself, I want to bring into the next relationship. A really fun little backstory, like my mom just picked up a year of sobriety. And so that relationship that I have with my mother and the ideals that I have with my family are significantly different than they were 2 or 3 years ago. Behind all of this, the main intention is that, one, we are continuing to do work on ourselves and do inventories when we see fit. At the same time, though, when it comes to the inventory, in an ideal world, the 10-step inventory that I am doing at night and sending my sponsors should suffice. However, unfortunately, I have had to do more inventory since then. The ideals, though, it's very important to keep in touch with them simply due to the fact that when I grow, what I want is different. When I grow, the relationships, my work, and more importantly, family in these rooms change, because the rooms that I needed when I first got sober are not the rooms that I needed today. And also the friends that I have today are significantly different than the friends that I had when I first got sober. So yes, I believe it's important that every single time we continuously look at our ideals to figure out, one, it's kind of cool to see how much we've grown. And more importantly, it's really awesome to see, all right, cool, this is maybe something that I need now. This is something that I need to address now. I'm gonna get an exercise in.
How y'all doing? I'm Kevin. I'm an addict. In reference to the fact that 5 are tandems, and your 5th step doesn't necessarily have to be done with a sponsor. As far as purpose, what is the core understanding of what a step 4 is for? And we're dealing with the literature stating that some of the worst stuff that we find in our 4, we are going to hold on to. So when you end up doing a 5th step, like when you're talking about addressing the things that you break down in a column, you might not identify something as a character defect when you do your step 4. So what is the core purpose, in your opinion, of a step 4?
Hello? Cool. I think you kind of said it right there, actually, at the end for yourself. Like, yes, I am trying to find the truth in all of these situations, but at the same time, I am trying to find the character defects that I need to work on. And I think that you summarized it absolutely perfectly. There's multiple. Every single person is going to find a very different experience when it comes to 4. The act of giving it with 5 and having somebody else, albeit a sponsor, a religious person, I forget the other example the big book uses, is I really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of the character defects that I am acting out on a regular basis so I can take action on them. The reason that resentments still happen, especially later on, or past traumas that continue to happen, is that I'm still human. I still act out and I still get insecure and I still get selfish, but I intentionally, or hopefully, if I can find those character defects, one, that list is going to get significantly smaller. I can attack those resentments when they pop up in the moment with honesty and God and love, instead of holding them on and potentially making them either, one, significantly bigger than they need to be, or 2, taking it out on somebody else. I do believe that the reason the steps go in chronological order from 4 and 5 to 6 and 7 is that once I do 4 and 5, the intention is that I am, especially from my experience, my sponsor took my 5th step or my 4th step and was writing down my character defects with me as I went on. when I got those resentments, or when I got those character defects, we found the spiritual principles that mirrored those. So for example, obviously dishonesty was honesty. Fear was faith, and so on. Is it perfect? Is it perfect? It's perfect in concept. Did I practice it perfectly? Absolutely not. And sometimes I would still act out on those character defects. But by finding those character defects in 4 and 5 and being able to practice in 6 and 7, I can eventually go and make amends in 8 and 9 that I don't have to make again. Because obviously if I had the action and I have to make the amends again, or I'm continuously acting out on that same action, then I'm not really doing the work. So I think you 100% knocked it out of the park. I'm here to find truth. I'm here to find a deeper knowledge of myself, but I'm really here to find these character defects as well, so I can learn the spiritual principles behind them and correct myself going forward with God's help.
I'm Steve. I'm a cocaine addict.
Hey, Steve.
It's been a good work. I don't know if I can make my idea clear or not, but I'll just say a minute or two about a personal experience that I had. And I got sober a while back and went through the steps with a sponsor, and like a lot of us do, you know, I didn't do everything that needed to be done, and when it started to give me troubles, I knew what it was, and I went with the sponsor and got that taken care of. And so everything was good because I felt sincerely that I had done thorough work and life was pretty good. 12 years later, I found a character defect that was fear-rooted, that was within me, that I didn't know I had. And it was fear-based. 12 years of sobriety, I had somehow managed to keep that defect at bay so that it didn't cause unmanageability. But while consciously or unconsciously keeping that at bay so that the unmanageability would be minimized, it also reduced the fullness of my life. And I was not consciously aware of that. But that was my experience. And I didn't know that I was living a life of less than. And when this defect popped up after being 12 years sober, it blew up a ton of ideas and thoughts and insanity. My pride, you know, this is bullshit. This shouldn't be happening. I'm 12 years sober. What the hell's going on here? Where did this come from? This is embarrassing as hell. I don't want nobody to know this was going on. How much effort am I putting into keeping this under the covers so it doesn't come out in the open? And what about the people that are really important to me? What if they find out? And I am really angry that I have to go through this because I thought I did all this already 12 years ago. This is just not right. So what I did was I went to any length to get away from being just myself. I went from Kansas to Phoenix, and I dumped a whole bunch of coin out of my pocket to get a therapeutic fix. And when I came back to Kansas 2 weeks later, my pocket was a whole lot lighter and I was a whole lot angrier. And the issue was just growing like cancer. And it was affecting not just me, but a lot of other people that were important to me. And it was either going to have a solution or something was really, really bad was going to happen, and I was probably going to get maybe the worst end of that deal. And I didn't know what to do. And I talked to my sponsor about it. And I sat down in a private room at home, quiet by myself, and made sure that I wasn't going to be interrupted for quite a while. And I started writing, and I started thinking about the recent past, like the last 12 months maybe, of these different situations that would cause this feeling. Because that's what brought me in these rooms, shooting dope. I want to change the way I felt. And it got to the point where it didn't work, and it drove me into these rooms. And so I started having this feeling that, I couldn't manage, and it went through all that rigmarole. And when I sat down to try to solve it, because I had gone to this high-powered therapy place and spent a bunch of money, and they didn't do nothing, and I was really angry, and I was about to lose whatever I thought I had. And I started writing. And I started thinking about my past history in the last 12 months and these situations, the dynamics that was kind of making those things pop up in my feelings. And I started writing down those specific situations. And I had, 10, 12, 15 of them. And they were all similar. And I wrote down, I was in the restaurant with so-and-so, and the conversation was about so-and-so and such. Or I was on the ball diamond playing ball with somebody, and they made these certain comments, different situations specific. And I started writing about them. What was going on? Who said what? What kind of body language were they talking about? How did they respond? And I really put some time and effort into really trying to accurately remember those specific situations that caused those difficulties. And when those things were going on, I was doing my best to act like I was fine and normal, but it was driving me nuts in my head because it was triggering a defect. But I didn't want nobody to know that I was unmanageable. That's my pride, my ego. I didn't want nobody to know that I was flipping out. I was 12 years sober. So here I am living this kind of double life right there in the moment on the specific times. And the more it happened, and it was mostly centered around one or two people that would trigger that. And so I focused those situations on writing about those interactions. And you know what I found out? I found out I had this defect that I didn't know I had. So it wasn't on my fourth or fifth step 12 years ago because I didn't know I had it. It broke my heart. It hurt my pride. And I didn't have any choice but to own it. And so I owned it. And what it amounted to was a fear of abandonment. I didn't know I had it. But I had adapted over the years of using and in my sobriety, coping techniques so that the fear of abandonment never really got triggered. But I got around somebody that triggered it, and everything went to hell in a handbasket. But when I was able to put my finger on it because I was so freaking miserable that I was willing to sit down and put in some hard-ass work to try to put my finger on what was opening the steam valve on that, I found it. And I was able to trace it back in my life to where I was subjected to some life experiences as a young boy. And that's where I got that fear of abandonment from. And I didn't know I had it. I was 32 when I got clean, and I was like 44 when I was able to put my finger on it. And this happened back when I was about 6. So for like 38 years, I had these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And on the one hand, my pride and my ego wasn't very happy to have to deal with this at 12 months sober and to be willing to be honest and share it with people that I cared about. But on the other hand, I was so grateful to have a solution. So I'm sorry I talked so long, but what I want to say about this whole situation is when we do that fourth and fifth step, it's not uncommon for us to leave things out on purpose because I don't want somebody to know how bad I was or whatever. But one of the truths about that is if we go around this room and everybody in here lays out their dirtiest rag on the table, before we get to the end of the room, we'll all be laying on the floor from lack of originality. I guarantee you. Ain't none of us done nothing new. But the interesting thing about this fellowship, the fact that I have a way out is powerful. I didn't know I was a prisoner of that. But when I found a way to manage it, I still have fear of abandonment. It's still there. It didn't go away. Nobody has removed it. But I have been given coping skills to recognize it and make a choice to manage it in an appropriate way. And I mean, it saved my life. That's all.
We got about 7 minutes. Anybody else?
What's going on? My name's Anthony. I'm an addict. No, I had to, like, when I was thinking about it and going through it, like, when you say, like, sex ideal with relationships, people, myself, you know what I mean? I had to make sure it was God's intent and not mine because I was recognizing my defects so I could fix them, not learn how to use them better. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, you know, I used to use my defects to survive, you know, that was like that was a serious thing in my life, you know. They got me through a season in my life, and I'm grateful that it did. But unfortunately, it did hurt a lot of people in the process, you know. So I had to make sure that I was aware of that, like when I was thinking about that, because, like with my defects, I'm trying to remove them defects, not learn how to do that better, you know. I think that really applies. And then when I was looking for what I'm looking for in relationships, not even just like with my lady or with friends, I had to make sure that I was aware that I was asking for something I was willing to give, you know, because obviously I think I'm perfect, you know what I'm saying? Like, to be real, it's got to be her fault, you know. And honestly, like, even when I was growing up, like, you know, even with, like, parents' issues and stuff, I could never understand why you don't see it from my point of view. I've obviously got to be right because I'm the one going through it. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, like, I had to be, like you said, what struck me with that is, like you said, you have to be willing to put in hard work to get what you're looking for. You know what I'm saying? And when I'm recognizing them things, I have to be willing. What I'm asking for is something I have to be willing to give. You know what I mean? Because obviously when you're trying to manipulate something, you're looking for a response for minimal effort, you know, like a bigger response. I don't know. I just didn't know if anybody else felt like that sometimes. That's all I got, you know?
Thank you. Travis, you want it? We'll end with Travis, who walked in late, but still wants the microphone.
I heard a really good question a few minutes ago, and I just wanted to give my own personal experience on it because it's something that I'm kind of in the middle of right now. So somebody asked about how to offer their fourth step to their sponsees and why people think about it in that way. And I think that personally, like, I'm really stupid. And so I need to be given things in bite-sized portions, especially when it comes to something as heavy as, like, my first fourth step. Only because there was a worksheet that I had found on the internet a long time ago, and it kind of breaks down like each column, and it has an explanation from the book, and then it has an explanation from that person. And one of the things that it says is to do, like every single column, it has a disclaimer that says do that column all the way down, and then do this column all the way down. And I think that for me that was important, because if I have ADHD real bad, so like if I like, and when I do 4 steps now, I still struggle with it. If I start working on a name and I'm like, dude, I don't know how we are about language on this microphone, so screw that person. Then I want to jump into that, and I want to start just leaning into that resentment, you know, and then I'll start forgetting about other things that probably should be on this list, and so on and so forth, right? And then the other part of it is people are already afraid. Like personally, I was really afraid of writing down like certain like family situations that I had gone through, certain situations that I had put other people through. So I already didn't want to put those down in the first place. And so if I'm tasked with like, all right, first column, second column, third column, fourth column, each person all the way through, let's make this thing happen, I'm liable to freeze up when it's my first time, you know? But another thing that for personal experience, I sat down yesterday and I sat down in a coffee shop, like Ross said, for 5 hours yesterday, and I belted out a 4-step, and I've done a lot of 4-steps, and I've done a lot of other people's 4-steps for them, in the last, you know, the time that I've been around. And like, if I hadn't been given the 4-step the way that I was, with my sponsor saying you have to put pen to paper because the book says, you know, in black ink, like you have to put it on paper, and you're going to do it one section at a time. And I would try to call him because I'm like trying to jump ahead, and he would say, hey man, this week we're only talking about names, right? And then this week we're only talking about the cause. And I'd be like, yeah, but I've been thinking about the my part stuff. He's like, I don't care what you've been thinking about, dude. That's not how this works, right? So it's kind of a lesson in humility for me also. But because I have done it in the way, or I've done it like the way I was given, and then I've offered that to other people in that way, then when the time came for me to realize, like, dude, I need to do another 4-step, then I haven't, me and my sponsor talk like a handful of times a month, you know, like we don't have this super vocal relationship where it's constantly like back and forth between us. And so like I didn't call him and say, hey man, I think I need to do another 4-step. I went to a coffee shop and I opened my laptop and I did a 4-step, you know, and like that happened because it feels second nature to me that like there's a lot of stuff that I'm realizing is eating my lunch right now. And so like I know what that toolkit looks like. And like if I had kind of hemmed and hawed and done half-ass 4-steps all the way up until this point, then like I probably would have offered another half-ass 4-step because that's what I knew. So, I don't know. I think about it from more of like a longevity perspective, that like if I know that I do it right the first time, and I know that I offer it to other people right the first time, then I know that it's right. And if I half-ass it the first time, then I'm going to give them a half-ass thing. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Travis.
All right, we will wrap this up. If you do have any questions that you need answered, see Steve. Right, Steve? And I will stay back here after for a little bit as well. But let's close this meeting up with a moment of silence followed by the serenity prayer.